I always thought I was lucky. My dad, Richard, was the kind of man people admired. Tall, quiet, steady. The kind of man who never raised his voice, but whose presence alone made you want to stand a little straighter. Growing up, he coached my little league games, fixed my broken bikes, and gave the kind of hugs that made the world feel safe. To me, he wasn't just a father, he was the father. The gold standard. He called me champ when I won, buddy when I messed up, and son every single day of my life. And I wore that word like a badge of honor. But everything changed the day I turned 25. It started with a letter. A yellowed envelope tucked in the bottom drawer of the old desk we just moved from my childhood home. Mom had passed 3 months earlier, and Dad, now slower, grayer, had asked me to help pack. That letter wasn't addressed to anyone. Just my name. No return address. No stamp. Inside, a folded note in my mother's handwriting. You deserve the truth. That one line sent something cold racing through my spine. Beneath it, a birth certificate. Mine. But in the space where it should have said Father, Richard Evans, there was a different name. Daniel Blake. Who the hell was Daniel Blake? I didn't tell my dad. Not right away. Something in me resisted. Maybe I was scared. Scared of breaking the illusion, scared of breaking him. Or maybe, deep down, I already knew this wasn't a mistake. I started digging. There was no Daniel Blake in my mom's family records. No old photos. Nothing in the attic or our photo albums. Until I found a box hidden beneath the floorboards of the old linen closet. Letters. Dozens. Faded ink and folded hearts. And in every single one, the name Daniel. They were love letters. My mother's, mostly. Full of longing and regret. I read them all in silence, sitting cross-legged on the cold bathroom tiles like a child looking for meaning in stories too old to be his. Apparently, Daniel was her college sweetheart. A best friend of my father. The man I knew as Dad. But it wasn't just a fling. It was a love. A desperate, intense kind of love. One that never truly ended. She wrote about how they almost ran away together. How she stayed, for safety. For security. For a man who'd raise a child that wasn't his. I felt the ground shift beneath me. Everything, my birthday parties, our father-son camping trips, the day he taught me to drive, began to feel complicated. Was he lying to me all along? Did he know I wasn't his son? Or worse, was he the only one who didn't know? I confronted him that night. Or at least, I tried. I stood in his kitchen, watching him stir his tea like nothing had happened. My mouth was dry. My hands, shaking. Dad, I finally said. Can I ask you something? He looked up at me with those familiar eyes, the ones I thought I'd inherited. Of course, son. What's on your mind? That word, son, cut deeper than any truth could. I held the birth certificate in my hand but couldn't speak. He must have seen something in my face because he sighed, put down his mug, and said the last thing I ever expected. So, you found the letters. That's when the ground truly gave way. For a long time, I had imagined that silence meant safety. That as long as no one said anything, no one asked the hard questions, things would stay intact. But now, everything I thought I knew had cracked open, and beneath it was a lifetime of half-truths. "Sit down, Dad," Richard said softly, motioning to the chair across from him. I did. But my heart wasn't still. It was hammering in my chest like it was trying to escape. He looked tired. Not just from age, but from years of holding something inside. "I always knew this day might come," he said, fingers curling around his mug. I swallowed. "So, it's true." He nodded once. "Yes. Daniel Blake, he was your biological father." Just like that. No drama. No denial. Just truth. "He was my friend," Richard continued. "My best friend, once. We met in college. Your mom and I, we weren't together yet. She and Daniel were on again, off again for years. I thought it would fade. But it never really did. My mind reeled. So she cheated on you?" Richard looked away. "No. Not exactly. She was with him when she got pregnant. But when he left, he panicked, ran off. She came to me. Said she didn't want to raise a child alone. Said she needed someone who wouldn't walk away. And you just said yes." He gave a sad smile. "She was the love of my life. I said yes because I loved her. And I knew that child, you, was innocent in all of it. You were already part of her. That made you part of me, too." My throat tightened. I didn't know if I wanted to scream or cry. "You were never a mistake to me," he added. "You were my son, in every way that mattered. That should have comforted me. But instead, it tore me in two." "So all those years," I asked quietly, "you knew? Every birthday? Every Father's Day?" He nodded. "Every single one. And I never once regretted it." That night, I went home and sat in my room for hours. The walls looked the same, but they didn't feel the same. They were lined with old trophies, photos of us fishing, him clapping at my high school graduation. He was always there. Always cheering. Always mine. And yet, he wasn't. The next morning, I dug deeper. I found an old Facebook account for Daniel Blake. No profile picture. No recent posts. But his location said Atlanta. I debated messaging him. I didn't tell Richard. I didn't want to break whatever fragile balance was left. Instead, I messaged Daniel with one line, "Did you ever know about me?" He replied 3 hours later. "Yes. But I was told you didn't want me in your life. I was told to stay away." The words hit like cold water. My mother had kept him away. I sent another message, "Why did you never fight for me?" He replied, slower this time, "Because I was weak. And because Richard was better for you than I ever could have been." I didn't know how to respond. Anger, shame, confusion, they were all there. I closed the laptop, my head aching. Days passed. I avoided both men. Every time Richard called, I let it go to voicemail. Every time Daniel messaged, I left it on read. It was too much. Too soon. But one evening, I found myself standing outside Richard's house again. I looked through the window and saw him sitting alone at the kitchen table, staring at nothing, the same way he had after Mom died. And in that moment, I realized something: love isn't always biological. Sometimes, the people who choose you are the ones who love you the hardest. I rang the bell. He opened the door. I'm still angry, I said. I know, he replied. But I'm still your son. He didn't say a word. He just pulled me into a hug that felt exactly like it always had, solid, warm, home. And maybe, that was enough. For the first time in weeks, my world was quiet, but it wasn't peace. It was the kind of silence that swells inside your chest and weighs everything down. I had answers now. I knew the truth. And somehow, it left more questions behind. I stayed away from both men, Richard and Daniel. But life didn't pause with me. I still had to show up for work, smile when clients came in, and pretend my entire sense of self hadn't been ripped in half. But even in those routine moments, the tension followed me. One night, while flipping through a shoebox of old photos, I found a letter tucked behind my kindergarten picture. It was written in my mother's handwriting. If you're reading this, it means you found out. I wanted to tell you myself, but I didn't know how. I hope you can forgive me. I made choices I thought were best. Maybe they weren't. But you were always loved. Always. I stared at the words for hours. I kept asking myself, who was I more angry with? My mother for hiding the truth? Daniel for leaving? Or Richard, for staying and never saying a word? I started therapy, not because someone told me to, but because I had no idea how to carry all this alone. My therapist asked, what hurts most? Without hesitation, I replied, that I don't know what parts of my life were real. Meanwhile, Daniel started reaching out more frequently. Not just with messages, but with old photos, grainy prints of him in college with my mother, letters he had written and never sent, even a hospital wristband from the night I was born. He told me he stood outside the delivery room. I was scared, he wrote once. I was young and reckless and stupid. But I loved your mom. I loved you before I even held you. I didn't know what to believe. To complicate things, Richard's health had started to decline. He didn't say anything directly, but I noticed the way he coughed too long, the way he winced getting out of chairs. His stubborn silence was somehow louder than any confession. I caught him one afternoon taking pills from a tray labeled, Chemo Week 4. You're sick? I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. He tried to smile. It's manageable. Why didn't you tell me? He looked at me and said something I'll never forget. Because I didn't want you staying out of guilt. I wanted you to stay because you chose to. That night, I broke down. Everything was unraveling at once, my identity, my relationships, my trust, even time itself. I started journaling every day. Not because I liked writing, but because it was the only place I could be honest without hurting anyone else. I'd write letters I'd never send, to Richard, to Daniel, to my mom. Some days, I'd write the same sentence over and over, I just want to feel whole. But being whole wasn't simple. Daniel asked if I wanted to meet. In person. Richard said it was my choice, but warned me not to expect closure. You might be chasing something he can't give you, he said. He wasn't wrong. But I had to try. I met Daniel at a quiet park on a Sunday morning. He was older than I expected, his eyes softer, shoulders slouched with regret. I know I don't deserve to call myself your father, he began. But I'm here. Whatever you want, answers, silence, distance, I'll give it. I studied him. Part of me wanted to yell. Another part just wanted him to disappear. But the deepest part wanted to know if any piece of him lived inside me. I didn't speak for a long time. I just sat there. Then I asked, "Did you ever love my mom?" He closed his eyes, then nodded. I never stopped. The story wasn't over. In fact, it felt like it was only just beginning. The cracks in the surface had revealed something I never expected, not just pain, but possibility. A chance to rebuild, not as someone's secret, or lie, or regret, but as myself. Whoever that turned out to be. Time had become a quiet, relentless enemy. Each tick of the clock only reminded me of how much I didn't know, and how quickly everything was unraveling. After meeting Daniel, the man who may be my biological father, my mind became a battlefield. I had hoped to feel some kind of resolution, some spark of connection, but instead, I walked away feeling more fragmented than ever. And now, Richard, Dad, the man who raised me, was slipping away, quietly and with dignity, but slipping all the same. The chemo was draining him. I could see it in the hollowing of his cheeks, in the way his hands trembled when he reached for his coffee. He never complained. Not once. But his silence screamed. One night, I found him sitting on the edge of his bed, breathing shallowly, the light from his lamp casting shadows across his sunken face. I sat next to him, unsure whether to speak or just sit in the pain with him. "Did you ever hate me for not being yours?" I finally asked. He didn't answer right away. Then, with a tired smile, he said, "Son, you were always mine. From the moment I held you. Biology never mattered." And just like that, my heart cracked. Not from pain, but from the unbearable weight of love. But the universe wasn't done testing me. A letter arrived 2 days later. It was addressed to my mother but forwarded to me from her old P.O. box. It was from Daniel. Inside was a notarized document, a paternity test request. He wanted legal proof. Proof of something I wasn't sure I wanted to know. I stared at the envelope for hours. Richard found me in the kitchen that night, the letter open on the table, my hands shaking. "You don't have to do it," he said gently. "You already know who you are." "No, I don't," I snapped. "I thought I did, but now everything feels fake. I need answers." You need peace," he interrupted. "And peace doesn't always come from knowing everything." I looked at him then, not as my dad, not as the man who raised me, but as a dying man clinging to the last pieces of his life, and still thinking of mine. That night, I dreamed of my childhood. Running through the backyard, scraped knees, bike rides with training wheels, laughter under summer stars, all with Richard. Not Daniel. Never Daniel. I woke up gasping, tears on my face, and a decision made. I wouldn't take the test. Some truths, I realized, come at too high a cost. But fate, cruel and uninvited, stepped in anyway. A week later, Daniel showed up at the house unannounced. He looked wrecked, hair unkempt, eyes bloodshot. "I had it done," he blurted. "The test. I found an old toothbrush your mom kept. I sent it in." My blood ran cold. And he pulled out the paper with trembling hands and handed it to me. 99.97%. The world went quiet. Richard stood behind me, silent, unreadable. Daniel looked at me like he was expecting a reaction, a hug, a tear, a breakdown. I gave him none. Instead, I walked to Richard, sat beside him, and held his hand. I already knew, I whispered. The air was thick with tension. Daniel's face crumbled. I just wanted to know, if I had a right. If I could be part of your life. You had a right, I said softly. But you gave it up. Years ago. He nodded slowly. I know. I'm sorry. And for the first time, I believed him. But sorry didn't fix the fracture. It couldn't undo the absence, the birthdays missed, the pain left behind. Still, I didn't hate him. I just couldn't give him what he wanted. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I thought the revelation of the DNA results would be the final earthquake. Everything had already cracked and shifted beneath my feet. But it turns out that heartbreak has layers. And sometimes, just when you find your footing, the ground crumbles again. A few days after Daniel's unexpected visit, I received a call from a woman named Evelyn. I know this is strange, she said cautiously, but I was very close with your mother. I tightened my grip on the phone. How close? She and I worked together for years. At the bookstore downtown. I remembered the old bookstore. My mom used to bring home dusty novels with curled pages and handwritten notes in the margins. It had felt like a piece of her world I'd never fully understood. There's something I think you deserve to know, Evelyn said, her voice lowering. Your mother kept a journal. She handed it to me in a brown envelope, worn, slightly torn at the edges. I didn't open it until that night, sitting in the same chair where I'd read Daniel's paternity results. I braced myself. At first, the entries were mundane, recipes, passing thoughts, small joys about my childhood. But around the 5th page, things changed. Richard knew, she had written. From the very beginning. He knew Daniel was the biological father. I never lied to him. He told me it didn't matter. That love isn't blood. But deep down, I think it broke him. I blinked, rereading the lines. Richard knew. All these years, he knew, and still chose to raise me. The entry continued. There were days he looked at Daniel like a ghost, haunted by what he didn't say. And I, selfishly, I let him carry the silence for both of us. Suddenly, everything felt heavier. Richard didn't just love me despite the truth, he lived with it. Every bedtime story, every scraped knee comfort, every graduation smile, all done with the knowledge that I wasn't his. And he never once let it change how he treated me. The next day, I sat by Richard's bedside again. I read Mom's journal, I said quietly. He looked at me for a long time, his expression unreadable. Then, finally, so now you know. Why didn't you ever tell me? I asked, voice trembling. He exhaled slowly. Because you were my son. And I was afraid that if I ever said it out loud, it would make it less true. That broke me. But it was killing you, I whispered. He nodded. In pieces. But love is sacrifice, son. I wanted to be your father more than I wanted to be right. Tears welled in my eyes, blurring the room. That night, Daniel called again. I want to meet him, he said. Richard. Just once. The request stunned me. I don't know if that's a good idea. He raised my son, he said, his voice thick with emotion. And I never thanked him. The meeting happened in quiet. Daniel walked into the room with a humility I hadn't seen before. He sat beside Richard, who was propped up by pillows, weaker than ever. "I don't expect forgiveness," Daniel began. "But I need you to know, I regret everything." Richard smiled faintly. "You should." There was silence. Then, "But I forgave you a long time ago." Daniel broke. He wept, not just for himself, but for the time lost, for the boy he didn't raise, for the man who did. And for a few rare minutes, the room was something sacred. Pain shared between fathers. Not rivals. Not enemies. Just two men, bound by the same boy, and the same regret. I watched them both, torn and whole at once. This story wasn't about betrayal anymore. It was about love, the kind that endures even when it's bruised and bent. Richard's breathing had grown shallow. Each breath rattled like the final pages of a book turning themselves. The room was quiet, save for the slow rhythm of machines tracking the life that remained in him. I sat beside his bed, holding his hand. It felt smaller now, thin and fragile, like paper. This was the hand that taught me how to throw a baseball, how to change a tire, how to shake another man's hand with pride. And here I was, not even his biological son, yet feeling like a piece of me would die with him. "Dad," I said softly, "you don't have to hold on for me." His eyelids fluttered open. His voice was barely audible, but it was there. I need you to know something." I leaned in. "I always knew," he whispered. "But I chose you. Every single day. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to." Tears filled my eyes. "You're more my son than blood could ever make you." I broke. I wept, not just for him, but for every moment I doubted what we had. He closed his eyes again, peacefully this time. I could tell, he had finally let go of the weight he carried for decades. And just like that, Richard, my father, slipped away. The funeral was quiet. Under gray skies and rustling leaves, I gave the eulogy. "He wasn't perfect," I said, standing at the pulpit, "but he was mine. And I was his. That's all that ever mattered." Daniel sat near the back, alone. He hadn't asked to speak, and I hadn't offered. Some things are better left unsaid. After the service, as people drifted away, I approached Daniel. "He forgave you," I told him. He nodded. "But I'll never forgive myself." "You don't have to. But now, it's on you to carry his legacy, too." We stood there in silence, two men tied to one father, one by blood, one by love. Weeks passed. I returned to my apartment, where the weight of grief settled like dust on every surface. I opened a small box Richard had left for me, his old watch, a photo of us fishing, and a handwritten note. "Son, if you're reading this, I'm probably gone. Don't waste your life wondering who you came from. Live it proving who you are. Dad." I held the note to my chest. For the first time in weeks, I didn't cry. I smiled. Because I realized something, I wasn't the mistake. I was the miracle he chose to love anyway. I visited Daniel one last time, not for him, but for me. "I don't hate you," I told him. His eyes widened. "But I don't need you to be my father. Because I already had one. And he was more than enough." I left without waiting for a reply. As spring arrived, I went back to the bookstore, Mom's old workplace. Evelyn was still there. "She kept this for you," she said, handing me one last envelope. Inside, another letter. "My sweet boy, life is messy. Love is complicated. But you were always the best part of both. Forgive me for what I couldn't say. And thank Richard for what I couldn't give." Mom, I closed my eyes, and for the first time in this whole story, I didn't feel confused, or broken, or angry. I felt whole. This story wasn't about betrayal anymore. It was about love, chosen, fought for, and kept in silence. A love that raised me. A love that never once wavered, even when the truth did. I stood in the quiet of my living room, watching the sunlight crawl across the floor. For the first time in what felt like forever, it didn't feel heavy. Richard was gone. My mother was gone. Daniel, the man whose name was written on my birth certificate but had never earned the title of father, was still alive, but he no longer occupied space in my heart. I had buried the truth. I had buried pain. But more importantly, I had honored the man who raised me, not out of obligation, but out of unconditional love. A few weeks after the funeral, I visited the small town cemetery again, alone. I brought a lawn chair and Richard's old thermos. I sat beside his headstone like we used to sit side by side at baseball games. "I still don't know why you never told me," I said softly. "But maybe it wasn't because you were afraid. Maybe it was because you knew, it didn't matter." There was peace in saying it aloud. Closure, maybe. Later that month, I received a call from Daniel. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail. "I don't expect forgiveness. But I hope, someday you'll let go of the anger. I never earned the title of father. Richard did. And I'll live with that truth every day." I deleted the message, not out of spite, but because it no longer controlled me. One day, while clearing out Richard's garage, I found a shoebox buried in a cabinet. Inside were letters he'd written but never sent. Letters to me. To my mom. Even to Daniel. Some were full of questions. Some of sorrow. But every single one ended the same way: "Tell him I love him. That will always be true." That was all I needed. Years passed. I met someone. We built a life together. We had a daughter. We named her Grace, after the strength Richard had always shown. One night, while holding her in my arms, I whispered, "You won't know him, baby girl. But he knew you would come one day. And he loved you, even before you were here." That's the thing about love. It doesn't always follow bloodlines. It doesn't come with rules. And sometimes, the people who love us the most, aren't the ones we expect. Richard taught me that. And that's where this story ends, not in pain, but in peace. I'll carry his name with me. I'll carry his lessons. And I'll pass them on, not just because he raised me, but because he made me who I am.